Hi, everybody. Welcome. For everyone who's new, welcome to the weekly town hall. This is where we try to talk about some of the anti-Asian laws and helping rally the community against these laws. So my name is Gene Wu. I'm the state representative for House District 137 in Houston. And I am uh, trying to help lead this fight in Texas. And we wanted to show you some of the things that we're concerned about, and we hope you are once you find out about them, you're concerned about them too. One of the big reasons I'm creating this set of slides and this presentation is because in my discussions with people, especially people in the Asian community and the Chinese community, and I tell them that the laws that try to take away our rights are coming back, and more laws are coming. Even in Texas, where we defeated them, people do not believe me. People say we won in Texas, and they're not gonna try again. And what I really want to tell you is not only are you wrong, that they are going to try again, that they're going to even put even more effort behind it this time. And in addition to that, there are many, many more bills in addition to the alien land law bills, the laws prohibiting land ownership by Chinese people, by Asian Americans. They're going to do more. It's going to affect employment, education, immigration, and just about anything else they can think of. And the real key to this, of why this is so urgent right now, is because we're following the same steps in history, repeating the exact same steps in history that led up to the Japanese internment. And at the end of the day, that is our single greatest fear, and it should be our greatest motivation to get organized and to demand our rights, because we don't want to go through that again. Okay. Um, so today we're going to talk about first a little bit of the past history. I think it's very important for Asian Americans to know what has happened to them and know what has happened in the past. And I want to tell you, our very sunny, happy, rainbow version of history for Asian Americans is not right. The history of Asian people in this country, Chinese and Japanese especially, is one that is very dark, filled with lots of pain and filled with lots of discrimination. And I think it's important us to know that, because the past will inform us of how the future will go. So number one, you can see on the right, these are just some of the old signs that were around. Um, Dealing with both the Japanese and the Chinese, and for back then nobody really cared or knew the difference, so it's all the same. Um, for 200 years, this country has passed laws against Asians, against Chinese, against Japanese, dealing with property, but also dealing with employment, education, and even marriage. And we'll talk about that. Anti-Asian laws were not just were not laws that were created to deal with a policy problem, meaning that there was an actual problem to solve. They were passed because people did not like Asians. That this is response to the public's anti-Asian sentiment, right? And if you want a more simple explanation, just call it racism. They hate Asian people, and so they pass laws against Asian people. And all of these laws have been ruled unconstitutional. So you say, well, why do we care if these laws have already been ruled unconstitutional? Why are we here now? Why do we care about talking to them? Because that does not stop them from passing these laws again. And we'll talk about the history. Some of these laws took almost 100 years to be ruled unconstitutional. Some of these laws survived on the books for 20, 30, 40 years. I think as a community, we are not going to tolerate that level of discrimination for that long of a time, and we must fight it and not just wait for the courts. And we'll talk about that. Okay. And the most important thing to note is right now, the legislatures in states, the US Congress are passing these exact same types of laws that we're about to talk about. It may be not exactly the same, not word for word the same, but the idea, the philosophy, and their intent is all the same. Okay. One brief thing. Let's talk just a little bit about the history of um, of what's happening. Okay. So starting from the very beginning of this country under the British, when the British were here, they did not allow any immigrants to own land. You had to be a resident, you had to be a person who was legally allowed here and wherever else. But as soon as the United States became its own country, the US Congress passed a law saying, we're not going to ban immigrants from owning land anymore. We want immigrants to come here, and we'll let the states take those actions themselves if they want to. And everything was okay. So the first Asians arrived in this country in about 1750, right? So, but it was not until 1850 that large groups of Asians started coming from Japan and China, okay? 1850. And within 10 years, within the next 10 years, they started passing anti-Asian laws. About mid-1800s, about 1860, the laws started coming, right? Was it to deal with the problem they were causing? Was it to deal with anything? No. It's because they did not like that there were Chinese people, and they did not like there were Japanese people here, right? You look at a little bit further on, right before the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, they said, well, what if we didn't ban all Chinese people? What if we just banned the women? What if we just banned women? And you think, why just ban women? That doesn't make any sense. What is it about women? Well, babies. The idea was that Asian people were not just like any other people. They were like rats. They were like vermin. You have to control their breeding. You have to make sure that they don't overtake a population. You have to make sure that they don't spread in your area. No women, because they looked at Asian people, they looked at Chinese people and Japanese people and said, you are like rats. Okay? And that is the way that Chinese people and Japanese people were described. That how they were described in a newspaper is like rats. And it was not just the next 10 years later, they said, well, we banned Chinese women. Let's go ahead and ban Chinese men. And even the people who might have said, okay, we were okay with it, just women, said like, well, if you do women and men, that's everybody. And that was the intent. The intent was they did not want any more Chinese people here. Okay? And the Chinese Exclusion Act would be carried forward for a long time. And throughout this time, there were other bills passed, like the Cable Act. It was not on here, but the Cable Act said that if you were an American citizen, and you married a Chinese person, you lost your citizenship, right? Think about what that means and why. What policy could that possibly serve? What goal can that serve other than just objective racism? Why would you say that if you married someone who is Chinese, that you lost your citizenship? Think carefully about that, and think about that. The reason we want to talk about this is I want people to understand that there is a very real hatred, a genuine hatred of Asian people and of Chinese people and of Japanese people, right? And so we go on to the early 1900s. Beginning in the 1900s, states started passing more laws. They started passing land laws. They started passing employment laws. They started passing immigration laws. They started passing all these things. And this was about, and we'll talk about this a little in a bit, but this was about 30 years before Pearl Harbor, before the World War II. This is before any kind of act of hostility between US and Japan, right? And already they were passing these laws because people did not feel good. They had bad feelings about Japanese people. They had bad feelings about Chinese people. So in response to those bad feelings, they passed laws saying that they can't own a home, passing laws saying they can't work, they can't go to school. And we'll talk about those one by one. But look at 1943. 1943, the United States was forced, they had to repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act because they were trying to sign a treaty with China to fight in World War II. But China said, we are not going to sign any treaty with you as long as you have a law that says we are not welcome in your country and you will treat us like rats. Right? So the American government repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. But you want to know something that's funny? They didn't actually repeal it, right? Because they loved this law so much. They loved being able to exclude Chinese people so much that they kept this on as policy, even though the law was deleted. The law had been erased. They kept a policy in place for another 20 years until 1965. You see the arrow going down from 1943? People hated Asian people, Chinese people so much that they kept this policy in place by a sheer force of will, that they took the time to repeal the law but keep the policy in place with people, right? That is the history of our country, right? And it was not until 1965 that the holds on Chinese families coming to America were released. So each year until 1965, only 100 visas were allowed from China, right? 100. So if you meet somebody in the Chinese community right now, I would say there's a 99% chance that they are from a time before, after 1965, that almost everyone you know came here after 1975, right? And my family came in the early 80s, and a lot of other people did too. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why we did not start coming here until about the mid 70s. It's because until 1965, we were basically prohibited from coming to this country. So I want to make sure everyone understands that we're not talking about a lifetime ago. We're not talking about centuries and thousands of years ago. This is within a human lifespan, that this country hated Asians so much that they kept a policy in place even though they repealed the law, okay? But at the same time, the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed. 1942, the Japanese internment, the Japanese incarceration, the Japanese forced imprisonment started, okay? And this is something I want to remind people. In 1942, the American government rounded up about 10,000 Germans and Italians. And they were all German and Italian nationals. They were citizens. They were not people here with green cards, not people here as citizens. And they were rounded up and detained. On the other hand, the United States government rounded up 120,000 Japanese Americans. 2/3 of those people rounded up were American-born citizens, children mostly, right? Many of them didn't even speak Japanese. There were even people who did not know that they were Japanese or half Japanese or quarter Japanese, but they were taken too, even though they didn't even know that they were Japanese by descent. And you think about why. Why round up even children? Why round up American citizens? And we'll talk about that. Because the idea is that every single person in that community, every single person, no matter if they're citizen or not, they're a risk, they're a threat to this country. And we will see this exact same philosophy and idea come back again. Okay? And what I want to make sure everyone notes that while we had a good period, we had a long period where the United States and the states passed a lot of laws against our community. For a while, after 1940s, many of those laws were repealed. Many of them were replaced. Many of them were knocked down by the Supreme Court. And everything was okay for a little bit. But right now, since about 2021, the number of states and the federal government passing new anti-Asian, anti-Chinese, anti-Asian laws has now restarted, right? And starting in 2023, the Rounds Amendment in the U.S. in the U.S. Senate, and on this is last week, we had China Week, where they passed some of these exact same policies that were repealed or found unconstitutional so many years ago, right? The same thing is happening again. Oops. Okay. Just a little bit of history. I'm not going to read this for you, but I want to remind people when we talk about the past, it's not just some little law, some small change, no big deal kind of thing. On the left is Oregon's Constitution. This is their Constitution. Think about how hard it is to change the Constitution, but they changed the Constitution to keep out Chinese people, right? This is 1850. Chinese people have only been coming for about less than 10 years. And already they are passing a law against Chinese people. That's how much they hate you. And this is, on the right side, is one of the most famous laws that started in California, the Webb-Haney Act. It's a law that strictly prohibits Chinese and Japanese people from owning land of any kind, not a home, not a farm, not a business, nothing. And what has always struck me by this picture is the photo of the Chinese people. And again, we think that the people who come here, they're not assimilating, they're not doing the right things. But those people look like everyone else from 1850, from 1900s, whatever it is. They look exactly the same. The only difference is they have Asian face, right? And that was the difference back then, and it is the difference now. And then nothing has changed in 100 years. These are states that took the time to pass into their constitution, to put into their constitution laws that say we don't want any Chinese people here. We don't want any Japanese people here. 15 states took the time to pass a constitutional amendment to their state constitution, right? Most of these laws, even though they were passed in the 1800s, were in effect until the 1950s. That's over 100 years. Think about that. That's how long it took to override these laws. Okay? And again, the courts will not necessarily save us, right? In 1878, the US Supreme Court says that Asian people, for whatever reason, were the only people that could not become citizens. The only way you could become a citizen if you were born here, and that's because they could not override the 14th Amendment. Okay? And so the courts have almost never been on our sides until recently. Again, we talked about property ownership. This is education. Just the same. Wherever Chinese people were found and Asian people were found, and they had children, the places, the states, the cities all said, we do not want your children going to school with other children, right? Because you're not really human. You're a rat. You're subhuman. And many states, even California, before Brown versus Board, took cases like this to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ended up forcing them to create a separate school, separate from the black students, separate from the white students. They had to have their own Chinese school. And guess how often they did that, right? So basically, Chinese kids could not go to school because the state says you have to have a separate school, and they just didn't build them. Employment, same thing, right? Starting in the 1800s, 1850s, really, when Chinese people really started coming here, how did they get rid of the Chinese people? By making sure they couldn't work. And I always tell people, you don't want to know why. Why there are so many Chinese Chinese food, some Chinese restaurants around here? Why are there so many dry cleaners and laundromats that are owned by Chinese people? And the answer is because for 100 years, that was the only work that our people were allowed to do, to make people's food and to wash their dirty underwear. Right? So Asian people for a long time said that that's what the only jobs you can have other than dying while building on the railroad. After the railroad was done, after the gold was mined, he said, you can make food and wash people's dirty underwear. And even still, even with that limitation, after Chinese people were still coming and they were building more laundromats and they were building more restaurants, they started passing laws saying, oh, well, only Chinese people have to follow these special code restrictions that say laundromats could not be made of wood, right? But only Chinese laundromats. Any other laundromats, wood was fine. So many of these laws passed in the 1800s were not repealed until the 1940s, almost 100 years. Immigration. Let's talk about the courts. And I know many people have come to me and say, oh, no, we're not worried. The courts will save it. This is clear discrimination. We don't have to worry about. The courts will save us. I think in the long run, yes, the courts will do the right thing. But remember, over and over again, you see courts ruling against our community, saying that that kind of discrimination against your people is the only kind of discrimination that we allow, right? The Korematsu case about the Japanese internment, same thing, that other kinds of discrimination was not okay, but discrimination against you is perfectly fine, right? And many of these cases, a reminder that many of these cases, for the courts to overrule these laws, it was almost over 100 years for them to do so, right? We cannot wait that long. So the concern now today is that we're taking these exact same steps, banning property ownership, banning employment, banning education, banning immigration. Those are the steps that our country took to get to the Japanese internment, right? The Japanese incarceration. And what we're concerned about is repeating these same steps in history for the same reasons, for the same philosophy. The idea that all Asian people are a danger to this country, that by their very existence, these rat people are a danger to our country and we have to deal with them now, right? The current anti-Asian laws read and sound just like the past anti-Asian laws. They share a lot in common. And the big thing they share in common is this idea that Asian people, by our existence in this country, we create a threat because we cannot be trusted. There's something inherent about Asian people that makes them disloyal, that makes them traitors, that makes them spies, right? California's Webb-Haney Act that we talked about earlier in 1913. This is, again, remember, 1913 is 30 years before the Japanese internment. It was passed because of the racist stereotype that people from Japan were disloyal by nature, that the people from this part of the world are, by their genetic makeup, disloyal, and we cannot trust them. And look at what General John DeWitt said. This is the man who was in charge of the Japanese concentration camps, right? He says, a Jap's a Jap. It makes no difference whether he is an American citizen or not. Think about that. This is the only thing. only Asian people have this set against them in America. That it doesn't matter if we're loyal, it doesn't matter if we're citizens, it doesn't matter if we're veterans, it doesn't matter. Asian people cannot be trusted. Japanese people cannot be trusted. And today we say Chinese people cannot be trusted. Right? We can replace Japanese with Chinese, and that quote would work exactly the same today. Okay. And this is the problem. Both the past and present. The reason for passing these laws, right, is one, to create someone to blame. That it's easy and politically powerful to scapegoat this community, the community that does not fight back, the community that does not get upset, the community that tells itself, just work hard and keep your mouth shut, right? We make ourselves into an easy target. Why not blame everything on them? What are they going to do? They're not going to vote. They're not going to protest. They're not going to speak up. So what is the danger? And again, for us, what it means is they're saying that these communities pose a threat to our nation. And while you say, okay, well, that's not everyone, that's just some people in the community, and, what's a big deal? Here's my easy question for you. If you don't think it's a big deal, tell me this. If I tell you there's a threat inside your house, there is something that is a danger to the life and safety of your family in your house, what are you going to do? Are you going to leave it there? Or are you going to deal with it? Are you going to get rid of the danger? Are you going to throw the danger out? Are you going to destroy the danger, get rid of it forever? Well, we people say that our community is a threat to this country. How do we not end up at a second internment? How do we not end up with the Chinese incarceration? Right? Can you imagine a situation where currently they're saying that everyone from China is a threat, but can you imagine a situation in the near future where the situation becomes more extreme? Maybe there's an international incident with China and the United States. Maybe missiles are fired. Maybe there was a mistake made. Can you see a possible future where the community's willingness to deal with this threat increases and saying we have to do something about them? And we come back to this issue of national security. And I always have to say, let me start by saying national security is a real interest. It is a powerful interest. And it is something we should be concerned about because China is a bad actor. It is a known bad actor. Period. The end. But just like in dealing with Japan in World War II, if you are concerned about the actions of a foreign government, then deal with their foreign government, deal with their agents, deal with those governments. Because when you label every single person from a place as a spy or an agent, not only is this unjust, but this actually is counterproductive because one of the most important things that our community does is that we call the FBI, that we call them and say, hey, something's going on. Because just like in World War II, when many of those people who were taken were given a chance to fight, that the Japanese, the Nisei Japanese who fought in World War II were some of the highest decorated soldiers anywhere in our country. Some of the bravest, some of the fiercest fighting, and some of the most important medals were won by Japanese Americans in their fight. And even with that, they could not prove their loyalty. That simply is wrong because, and not only that, but imagine how much information the FBI gets from our community about what's going on, right? And if we suddenly just say, you know what, just like during the China initiative in the last few years under Trump, The community simply says, we're going to stop cooperating. We're going to stop calling in tips. We're going to stop being helpful. Because if you're indiscriminately going against everybody, then why should we help? Right? Why shouldn't we protect ourselves instead? So we talked about the past. We talked about some of the things they're going to do now. People have had a question, why? What's pushing this? And the easy answer is, unfortunately, Project 2025. Project 2025, for those of you who don't know, is the combined masterpiece, the final work product of basically every conservative group in America. It is spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation, but it is the input for this document, for this product is basically every conservative group in America. And here's what it is. It is a game plan. It is a plan of action for virtually every single thing in government, from the very top, from like nuclear weapons down to education, down to the environment, healthcare. Everything is covered. Every single thing that the US government touches, Project 2025 has an opinion on it and says what to do. And if you want to know if Project 2025 cares about the Asian community, let's take a look. One, national security obviously is one of the most important things for the government, and it is in Project 2025 as well. And Russia, who is a nuclear power and has nuclear weapons pointed at our country, is mentioned 108 times, right? That's Russia, a nuclear adversary, a Cold War adversary. China is mentioned more than 800 times, right? So if you want to know what the Project 2025 cares about the Chinese community, let me just tell you a very easy answer is yes, right? And there's some people who say, oh, it's just the Heritage Foundation and they're kind of crazy. Well, hold on. Number one, the Heritage Foundation is America's oldest and largest conservative think tank. They are the people behind policies. Almost everything they write down as policy, as ideas or policy, becomes law within a short amount of time, right? The Heritage Foundation is well respected, and what they say matters. But it's not just that. Look at this list. This is their own list. This is the Project 2025 list of who helped out and worked on this product, right? This is only a small fraction of the groups that were involved. The rest of the groups, there was so much we couldn't get it onto the screen. And this is virtually every single conservative group in America. That's it. And they all had a part in this. They all had a say in this. They all put their ideas in. And Project 2025 is their collective idea, their collective wish list of what they want to do in office. Okay. So here are the big things that Project 2025 call for. And this is only a small fraction of what's in there dealing with China. Okay. Most importantly for our community, the revival of the China Initiative. And for those of you who don't know, China Initiative was a project under Trump. It was not law. It was just an order. And basically, he told the FBI, drop everything you're doing and investigate Chinese Americans. And so the FBI stopped investigating other people and instead conducted more than 3,000 investigations of Chinese Americans, doctors, scientists, and researchers. Okay. This is 3,000 careers ruined, 3,000 lives ruined. And you know how much they got for ruining all these lives? You know what they got out of it? You know how many instances of espionage was found? 0. Over 3,000 lives and careers ruined, right? And what they found was 0. Instead, they filed 77 misdemeanors. You forgot to fill out this paperwork. You filled this out incorrectly. Your taxes are late. Bullshit stuff. Right? So we stopped investigations on actual espionage in order to investigate Chinese people. And they got absolutely nothing out of it, and they want to return to that. Why? Why would you return to a program that found nothing and caused problems? Because under the China Initiative, the Chinese community stopped cooperating, stopped helping. Why would you do that? Because the objective is to say, we don't want Chinese people here, right? Closure of the Confucius Institutes, denial of student visas to immigrants, a ban on Chinese immigrant access to higher education, prohibitions on employment, bans on Chinese immigrants working in academics or research, bans on technology and critical infrastructure, no communications, no computer hardware or computer programming, no agriculture or food production. Why ban food production? What are you going to do? And their argument is, well, food production is critical to our nation's safety. But how much food production would you have to control to even be able to make a slight difference, right? Those things don't matter because the objective is simply to say we don't want Chinese people here for any reason. And we're going to start with blocking all the things that we know Chinese people are here for: academics, research, technology, computers, communications, right? Bans on WeChat, ban on TikTok, Temu, whatever else. Alien land laws prohibiting land ownership, eliminating family reunification immigration policies, eliminating chain migration. That was one of Trump's first attempts when he came into office. This has been a conservative goal forever because that is the way Asians come to this country. They want that closed, right? Sweeping roundups. When they hold up signs that say deportation now, they're not just talking about Latinos. They're talking about Asians too. And again, we have said this in the past, but these policies specifically will be applied against green card holders, permanent residents, and visa holders. And that is before they start applying to citizens. And I'm warning you again that citizenship will not save us. And so people who say, oh, this is just a fancy wish list, they're not really going to do this. Again, I remind everyone who the Heritage Foundation is, who all these conservative groups have worked on this. This is everybody, okay? Governor Tim Walz had a great quote that says, when somebody takes the time to put together a playbook, they are going to use it. You're not going to draw a map, draw a guidebook, do all these things if you don't intend for people to use it. It makes no sense. And I want to make this point very clear. Project 2025's attacks on the Asian community have already happened. They are happening right now, and some of it has already happened. We're not talking about the future. We're talking about we're already behind. We are already behind in responding to this. Right now in Congress, this last week, they had China Week, and they passed 25 bills. Some of them did very little, but again, one of the first bills is the reinstatement of the China Initiative. One of the first bills is to say Chinese people, Chinese immigrants cannot buy land, right? This is just the starting point. This is just what they're willing to throw out there right now. But I promise you, if we don't fight back, if we don't do something now, this list will increase. What this list has on it will get increasingly worse, right? This is just 25 bills in 1 week that were all passed. And it's not just the federal government. This is occurring across the nation in almost all the states. Don't forget, just like in the past. The first state to pass anti-Chinese laws about land ownership was California. California should be on this list too. California was the first state to pass their anti-Chinese laws now. The only reason that they're not on this list is because Governor Newsom vetoed the law, right? And part of the reason that California passed their law was because the community did not speak up, because the community did not tell them that this was racist. The community did not go up and say, this just drives more hate into our community. Look at all these states. The ones with stars on these states, of the 24 states that have passed some kind of law, more than half of them had a provision that says, we're applying this to all immigrants from China, all the immigrants. Because just like in the past, the idea is every single one of them is a danger. Every single one is a threat. We're not going to go this deeply, but again, this is property ownership, right? This is one of the example state laws of property ownership. This, again, the law affected both permanent residents and visa holders. What is the point of affecting permanent residents? These are people who says, we want to be Americans. America is our permanent home. We are permanent residents here. But again, state after state have either passed these laws or about to. Education. This is from Texas. This is a straight bill that says if you are a Chinese immigrant, you may not attend university in Texas. There are no difference between state university, private university. It doesn't matter. If you are a Chinese immigrant, you cannot attend university in Texas. That's it. All right. This is another law that actually passed. This is Florida, right? Florida's law says that this is both an attack on education and employment, because it says that no state university can have any kind of relationship between anyone from China, any immigrant, any graduate student who's here. And while so basically you cannot get a job with any university in Florida. Now, for undergrads who can pay their own ways and don't have to work, that might be okay. But this is the end of graduate education for Chinese people in Florida, because for almost all those programs, all those PhD programs, all those doctorates, there are residency requirements, there are internship requirements, you have to be a TA, you have to be a lab assistant. None of that is possible now, right? So it's not possible for Chinese people to get a postgraduate degree in Florida now, right? And we go back to this again. The point of this entire presentation is to try to show you that in the past, states and the federal government have passed laws on property ownership, education, employment, housing, and immigration. And then eventually it'll lead to personal relationships, and it resulted in the Japanese internment, the Japanese concentration camps. Today, 2020, 2024, in federal government and the state government, people have either passed or about to pass laws dealing with property, education, employment, housing, immigration. Project 2025 calls for restrictions on property, education, employment, housing, immigration, right? So this is the big question, right? And not just that. We added this slide in just recently. This is from a Trump speech just recently, right? They're coming in from China, 32,000 over the last few months, and are all military aides. They're mostly men, and it sounds like to me they're trying to build a little army in our country. Is that what we're trying to do? They're coming from the Congo, they're coming from Africa, they're coming from the Middle East, they're coming from all over the world, Asia, and you got to get rid of these people. Notice that he doesn't qualify this as saying, like, we're talking about the illegals. We're not talking about this as saying these are criminals or bad people, but merely coming from these places makes you bad. That even legal immigration is unacceptable if it's coming from these places. Okay? So just remember that. Remember the old hate. The old hate that said that we were like rats, that we had to be extinguished, exterminated, that we had to control the breeding population. That hate is coming back. The old hate, the ancient hate is back. Not the we just don't like hip hop, we don't like some stuff, but these people are inferiors. They're subhuman. They're not worthy to be here. We need to dispose of them and get rid of them. We got to get rid of these people. This is not a theory. This is not like just Gene Wu is throwing wild ideas out there. The past history, you can look up for yourself. The current, what's happening right now, you can look up for yourself. Project 2025, they wrote it and put it out there. Everything that we have about Project 25 is their direct quote. Okay? So you can say, Gene's crazy. This is not likely to happen. Well, let me ask you about that. Let's say I'm wrong. Let's say I'm overblowing it. Let's say the risk that we would have a second Chinese internment is only 5%. Would 5% risk be enough for you to do something, to react, to organize? Would 5% of probability of your family being rounded up by force, is that enough for you to say, let's do something? Okay. Let's say it's not 5%. Let's say it's 1%. Hell, let's say it's less than 1%. Let's say it's 0.1% that there is a possible future in 10 years that you will have to tell your family that soldiers are going to come to your and they will be forced to get into a truck and you will be taken to a camp. Is that 0.1% enough for you to say, no, let's do something? That's all I'm asking. That's the question I'm here to ask you. Is that enough for you to say, let's do something? And I hope it's yes, because I can warn everyone who's willing to listen. But if the people hear the message and they see the danger, but they're not willing to act, then the result is the same. Okay. This is my last slide. You see all these different signs here? These are signs for, some of it was for our people, some of it's for other communities. But these were all signs that were common throughout our country. But all the other communities, whether they're Black or Latino or Jews or Muslim, they fought back. They fought back and said, we will not tolerate these kinds of signs anymore. Right now, they're putting these signs back up. No dogs and no Chinese allowed. These signs are coming back up, but they're not coming up in front of stores. They're coming up in the federal government. They're coming up in state governments. They're being put on the front doors of universities. Are you ready to fight back? Or are we just going to lay down like always and just let them kick and punch us? Okay? That's it. That's all I got. So I'm happy to take, we're almost at an hour, but I'm happy to take questions.